OBS is a useful software commonly used for recording and streaming. It is the go-to for these purposes because it is simply the best around. Here in this video, I'll show you my general guide and advice for using it in simple scenarios like just recording your screen or streaming videos, and also attempt something more in-depth like explain what the different codecs, file containers, and other stuff that I understand well enough. This is the OBS layout. This is going to be the user interface you'll be subjected to once you fire up OBS. Sometimes at your first start, a window asking if you'd like to use the auto configuration wizard will appear. If you want to use OBS for simple scenarios, then you can trust in the software and agree. Otherwise, you can stick with me through the advanced section later on. Scenes will carry your sources, making each scene you make unique or a duplicate of another. You can create a scene with the plus button or right-click and then add. Sources will contain the things that you want to be recorded, like the screen or a certain window that you want. You can add what source you want to be recorded by going to the plus button or by right-clicking and then adding another source. There are plenty of things in the Sources tab, so I encourage you to take the wheel and experience them one by one for a better grasp on what each sources do. This is where all your audio interfacing is placed. Here, you can edit which tracks an audio source goes by checking a box. You can also use limits, filters, mute, or gain for your voice or the noise of your desktop audio, and manage more audio sources set up by you in the Sources tab or in the control settings later on. This tab is basically the way that you transition between scenes. For example, if you had multiple scenes and wanted to transfer over the other in style, then you can utilize this feature. If you want to customize your own transition, then you can add a scene transition stinger where you'll place a video file in it and have that to be your new transition. The Controls tab is where you want to place your attention to if you want to use this software. It is where you'll find the button to start recording or streaming, and most importantly, to configure the output of your recording, the settings. This is where we'll mostly focus on for this video, specifically the settings section, or well, just the settings. But I will make sure to talk about the other tabs and functions of OBS once I've said my piece on section 1 and 2. If you wish to use the software extensively, you have to familiarize yourself with the layout and the things that you can do in various tabs. This simple explanation serves only as an introduction so that you may step in knowing a little more than nothing. That said, let's proceed to section 1, simple settings for people that don't want to worry. A very quick and simple way to set everything up is by using the auto configuration wizard. It is a useful tool for if you don't want to think about this and that and just want to get straight into recording. To use it, we go to the ribbon and click Tools, and then click on the auto configuration wizard. Answer based on your preferences. For recording, you can set up how you want to record and be done with it. For streaming, you have to select a streaming service and log into your account before proceeding. And by the end of either, the wizard would have recommended settings for you that you can take confidently. You can actually stop here if the settings provided is enough for you, but if you wish to know more, we'll proceed on to the settings. To get into the settings, let's click on the obviously named button on the controls. Here, we have plenty of customizations for almost everything we do in OBS. Let's run through them quickly. This is where most general customizations are located. The little things here are located, such as the ability to change the language, the ability to opt in on an update frequency, and how you want the application to function when minimized. Changing the settings here will not affect the overall quality of the video, more for the quality of life, but it's wise to run through them on your own time. The Appearance Settings tab, as you can imagine, changes the appearance of OBS. In their new update, there's a new interface to change the size of the text and their dimensions, but overall, it still serves the same purpose of making OBS look how you want it. So yeah, this Settings tab is just to change the appearance of OBS. This is the Setting tab that picks the live streaming service you want to output to using OBS. Here, you can select a live streaming service, connect your account, or use a stream key. This is it where you'll customize the quality of your stream though. That would be in the Output Settings tab, the one directly below this. This is the setting tab most involved with the quality of your recording and or streaming. Here, you can customize in either simple or advanced. If you use the auto configuration wizard, then this setting tab would already have values set because of it. As a heads up, we'll have our sites here for the majority of the video later. This is where we'll set up our audio. We can set up more microphones and more desktop audio sources here if we want, and also set the sample rate of our audio, which could result into a nicer audio. That's a lot of audio. Alright, well, anyways. Other than that, here we can set the push to mute, push to talk, and some other more that you can check for yourself later on once you know more. In this setting tab, we can set our base canvas, output resolution, and frames per second. If you use the auto configuration wizard, then there would already be values input on the blanks. If not, then for now we can use the drop down button on the base canvas to choose your native resolution or choose from the standard resolutions listed by OBS. The option 1920 by 1080 is a good enough resolution to record and stream in my opinion. Set the output resolution to be similar, ignore the downscale filter, and set the FPS to whichever one that you like. 60 is the most preferred by many, but I think 30 is also good enough. Later on the more thorough section 2, I'll expand on this and our other options. But for now, we only want simplicity, so these settings are generally good enough. You can set your shortcuts here. Just click on one and then set your key. It would be wise to set the hotkeys to a combination usually uncommon for many applications and something you can be familiar with. Your custom hotkeys could be useful for instant screen recording or streaming. The Accessibility Setting tab. It's a place closely similar to the Appearance Setting tab where you'll set the colors and the appearances of colors that appear on your OBS interface. Really, it's just something for customization again. You wouldn't really want to touch this unless you want to change some designs on OBS. The Advanced Setting tab, living up to the name, contains pretty advanced settings. It's best to leave these settings alone unless you know what you're doing. We will come back here again after my discussion in section 1 and 2. Hopefully anyways. That's all for the settings. I will not get into extreme details for most of them, so I encourage you to look into them and their functions to gain a better grasp on what they can do. With that said, let's move on to configuring the output settings using the simple settings mode. To gain more control on the quality of our recordings and streams, we go to Output and configure our output settings. We're going to be using the simple mode as it is usually enough for most people that just want to record using OBS. The advanced mode will be reserved for a more in-depth discussion at the quality of our output later, because all we want currently is to record and stream without all that complication. To get started, we'll run through the settings here sequentially, beginning with the stream section of simple mode. But to get a more accurate reading on the settings that we can set, we have to pick a live streaming service over at the stream settings tab just above the output settings tab. Service is where we'll pick up the live streaming service we, or rather you, want to use. Pick your preferred service and set it up. Some services offer you either connect an account or use a stream key. Setting that up is not for me to instruct you in this section, but I will explore it sometime later. For now, pick an option and stick by it. It is essential to know what the live streaming service offers before we set our streaming output settings after all. Back to the output settings, video bitrate. The video bitrate determines the overall quality of your video. But before you can determine the quality of your video, you have to determine your internet upload speed because your upload is the one responsible for sending the video to the live streaming service. Live streaming services tend to limit the bitrate, so you'd best check their recommended bitrate. But to make it easy, here are YouTube's and Twitch's, the two most popular live streaming services, bitrate recommendations. Set it to the recommended bitrate for the best streaming quality. An audio bitrate between 128 to 192 are good enough for streaming. Like video bitrates, live streaming services also have recommended audio bitrates, so it is best to abide by their recommendations. Video encoders are the ones that actually encode the video, meaning they are the ones that do the work so that a video actually appears. Every hardware has a solution to video encoding, like Nvidia's NVENC. These are the ones with the hardware label to them because they are hardware encoders. They are fast but compromise in quality in the past because nowadays they are the best options that you can pick. If you have a nice video card or an integrated GPU, you can pick any of the hardware options. The software options, on the other hand, are generally not recommended if you have a low-end CPU. This option basically determines how well the encoder does the job. The slower the option, the better the video will look, but the more processing power it'll take. Sometimes the encoders use different ways to express their preset speed, like Intel's implementation, but still basically function the same, so don't worry about that. Audio encoder determines the audio compression solution. AAC is the standard and pretty much the only accepted audio encoder option by most live streaming services. So, select AAC if you haven't already. That covers about all the settings for streaming. You may configure it based on the live streaming service that you plan to stream on. Just remember to abide by the limits set by the services though. In any case, moving on to recording. First up is the recording path. This is going to be the folder or place where your recordings are going to end up in once you finish recording. You may set your recording path to wherever you want. I advise you put it in a place or path that you're familiar with so that you know where to look when it's time to edit, upload, or just to watch your recordings. Unlike streaming where you have to determine the video bitrate, recording sets it for you. You may pick any of the options depending on how you want your video to turn out and how much storage you can allocate for your recordings, as the higher the quality, the larger the file size. The recording quality, high, is usually good enough, so you can basically just pick that and not worry about anything else. The recording format determines the container of your video. The container, as clued in by the name, contains the video and audio files of your recording so that you could actually view a video with an audio and not just one or the other. MP4 and MOV are pretty much identical, meaning they are both very compatible to most if not all devices and editing software. If you wish for maximum compatibility across different video editing software, then you can use one or the other. MKV, the default that OBS usually sets, is a versatile container that, if your OBS crashes, will retain the recorded files until the moment OBS died. The flaw of MKV is not its own, but of the softwares of today, as multiple editing softwares are incompatible with the MKV file container. The only compatible software I'm aware of for this container, which is MKV, is DaVinci Resolve. Use this container if you want the versatility and if you can edit in DaVinci Resolve. Since this option isn't limited to what the streaming service recommends, we are given more options, depending on your hardware capabilities, of course. The hardware options are still the best options here, but with an expanded list, it might get confusing to pick which one. The safest and probable best option is to pick the ones labeled as H.264. It has become the standard around the world, which is why even the live streaming services you use either have this as their only option or their most recommended option. It's compatible with all video editing software, it's not that demanding to process anymore, making it great for weaker hardware, and it won't cause any problems. Pick this option if you want to have maximum compatibility, decent efficiency, and/or have weaker hardware. The second in the line, H.265, or commonly referred to as HEVC. It's a better version of H.264, but with limited compatibility, meaning not all video editing software or live streaming service supports it completely or works with it as smoothly. It boasts greater efficiency, so you'll have smaller file sizes but same quality, at the cost of more processing, risking your device to have encoding issues, such as encoding overloads. Use this if you want to prioritize file size over compatibility. The third and current final in the line is AV1. It's the rival of HEVC when it comes to efficiency. Since they are similar to each other, it's safe to say that the same rule applies to AV1 when it comes to compatibility. Hence, you must only use this if you have a powerful hardware and prioritize file size over compatibility. As a final advice before moving, HEVC and AV1 are both supported by DaVinci Resolve, so you can confidently use these options if you own a copy of that video editing software. Similar to what happened to Video Encoder, the options have expanded, but realistically, we will only use AAC for the majority, if not all, of the situations. So select that for now, or for every occasion. This setting is tied to the audio mixer, so let's take a small detour there. Here, in the audio mixer advanced properties, we see a checkbox at the far right corner of the audio sources, called tracks. These checkboxes determine which audio track they'll be heard in. You can uncheck all, and you won't hear any of it in any tracks. Check one, and you'll only hear it in that one track. Be sure to have at least one of the boxes in the audio mixer checked, and do remember that you also have to check the corresponding audio track back at the output settings so that the audio track is actually included in the recording. That's going to be all for the output settings tab. The overall configuration of the streaming and recording settings lies on you and which live streaming service you wish to use. These are the essential information that you need to know to have a general grasp on OBS and the quality of your output. There's more into the fine-tuning of your OBS output, but the simple settings you have set up here are generally good enough for the most use cases of the software. Meaning, you can actually just recheck the section 1 of this video if there are things you did not understand, and not worry about the rest because frankly it doesn't matter unless you want to worry about it. With that said, if you do want to worry about it, then we'll be proceeding to section 2 now. Make sure to keep your ears glued because I will now be talking with some technical sense. Just wait for section 3 where I get armed out to this damn script. Section 2. Advanced settings for people that want to worry. In this section, I'll generally talk about the advanced mode of the OBS output settings. Codec, bitrates, resolution, expanded audio mixer setup, and some other more are located here. We'll mostly be reviewing what we've learned in section 1, but also expanding upon it. Because, you know, that's how learning works. Anyways, moving on. Before we proceed to the more advanced mode of output, we're first going to do a quick configuration of our resolution once more. We skimmed our way out of there last time because complicating was unnecessary. Now, let's look more into it. The base canvas resolution is often recommended to be set to your computer monitor's resolution, but it doesn't have to be if you plan on recording more than your screen. You may increase it, decrease it, or go wild with it. It isn't limited to only what resolution you actually have, because it is, as contextualized by the name, a canvas where you'll place various things, which in this case are the sources, if you remember those from section 1. Output scaled resolution, on the other hand, is the resolution that the base canvas will be recorded or streamed at. It's a camera that records the happenings in your base canvas, so to speak. Setting the base canvas and output resolution to have the same amount of pixels is a good practice to maximize quality, ensuring that no detail are lost. You can configure the output resolution using the drop-down option. Generally, the options reference the base canvas or they lower it. For example, while keeping my base canvas the same, I can set my output resolution to 1280 by 800, but it doesn't give me the option to raise it to something like 4K. The result would be my recording at 1280 by 800. It's not much of a revelation, just how the setting works. As for why you would want to do this, it's very simple. Higher resolution equals more processing. Weaker hardware cannot handle encoding higher resolutions like 2K or 4K, so an option you might want to pick is to lower the output resolution to something like 1920 by 1080 or 1280 by 720. There's more nuance into it, but that is the general estimate of things, so keep that in mind when setting your base canvas. Besides that, it's easier to just change the output resolution than to change the base canvas as well. When setting an output resolution though, it's good practice to match the base canvas's aspect ratio, because if you don't, it will look like the video is stretched, or it'll look like the video is thinned. It does not scale well, hence looking off. You can edit it away, but it'd be better if we just not deal with it from the very beginning. I mean, these settings, or well, these examples do not look good because of the way they're recorded, or rather because of their aspect ratio. Here's a table I made listing resolutions and their aspect ratios. You may reference this to avoid those bad recordings such as the stretchy or thin recordings. Or, as an alternative, you can peek at the numbers that come after the base canvas and the output resolution, which are their aspect ratios, so that you have an idea on where your resolution lines up to. In the process of lowering our output resolution, you might have noticed another option light up. That option is the downscale filter. The option basically poses the question, what technique do you want your scaled resolution video to use to make it look comparable to the source? Let's run through our options without getting too in-depth. Bilinear is worse, area is better, bicubic is even better, and Lanxess is the best, but for whatever reason, it struggles with text. You can pick between any of these options, but from my personal observation, bicubic and Lanxess give the best results. For the last setting in the video settings tab, we find the FPS. FPS, or frames per second, is the measurement of how many sequence of frames a video will run through per second. You probably already know that though. The more frames you have, like 48 or 60, the smoother the video will be. Of course, the more frames per second the recording have, the larger the file sizes, and the more processing power it'll take. Much like higher resolutions, weaker hardware cannot process absurd amounts of frames like 90 or 120, so you must set it appropriately. I recommend 30 frames per second for slow-paced recordings and 60 frames per second for fast-paced recordings. Other than setting the frame rates, you are given option, or rather ways to actually set it. The first option we're currently using is the common FPS values, which, as advertised by its name, contains the most common FPS values used in either film or general recording. Use the drop-down list to choose from the choices and settle with whichever one you're most comfortable with. Integer FPS value, the second choice, allows you to set your own FPS values. You may set it to an odd FPS value that you would find comfortable, like 12 or 26, or the much higher values like 90 and 120. Whatever FPS you pick, this is the one that gives you the most customization over its values. Fractional FPS values, on the other hand, works by division. It's a little uncommon to use this option, but it may work to your favor in certain works, which I am not so knowledgeable on. Still, here are some values you may input here. How you use them is up to you. Finally, after properly setting up the video and learning about its extra layer, we now proceed to the Output Settings tab, Advanced Mode. Don't be too afraid to configure the settings here though, to find out what really works for you. Without properly setting it, you might get a video that is unsatisfactory in resolution and FPS. Tinker with the settings as much as you want. In any case, let's proceed! To get started, we'll first switch to the Advanced mode. This time, instead of streaming, we'll first start with recording, because if you get what all the numbers here mean, then you can apply that knowledge to streaming as well. Keep in mind what I said about live streaming services and their recommended settings though, because that will not change regardless. As you may have noticed, we have two new setting sections in the advanced mode of output. The recording settings, for how the recording is done, and the encoder settings, a setting that is interconnected to the video encoder that we set. We'll run through them sequentially. The recording settings are relatively simple, with the recording path, format, encoders, and all that fancy stuff contributing to the overall formation of the video. Starting with the recording path, if you remember how we set up the recording path, then we have no need to discuss it again. But if you've skipped to the second section and not looked at section 1, then here's a quick summary. Recording path is going to be the place that your recordings are going to end up in. A good practice is to set the recording path to a folder that you're familiar with. Recording format, on the other hand, we can also review and then move on, but I'm going to add the other options that I didn't talk about, namely the fragmented MP4 and MOV, as well as the new hybrid MP4. If you remember from before, recording format sets your file container. Virtually, there's no difference in the quality that they deliver, but some are better at handling file corruptions. MP4 and MOV are very identical and have maximum compatibility with most, if not all, video playback and editing software. Use either if you want to edit your videos for later. Their weaknesses though is that if your OBS crashes or if your PC dies, then the video will become corrupted and unusable. MKV, on the other hand, doesn't have this weakness. It will still save your recording even if OBS crashes. The downside of using MKV is that not a lot of things support it, and you can basically surrender the thought of editing your videos on any video editing software except for DaVinci Resolve, because it's the only one that apparently supports it right now. To combat the possible corruption of your video files due to the software error or hardware crashes, we have the fragmented MP4 and fragmented MOV solutions. MP4 and MOV both need to be finalized, as in to stop the recording so that they could sort things out and put the video together. This results to their weaknesses that I've discussed earlier, because if you never finalize it and the OBS just crashes, the file will, as I've said before, become corrupted and unusable. Fragmented MP4 and fragmented MOV is a workaround to prevent such recording casualties. It, as clued in by the name, fragments the MP4 or MOV file into possibly per few minute chunks, finalizing the chunks with recording and then proceeding to repeat the process until the recording is entirely finished, like if you just press the stop recording button actually. It's an emulation of MKV, but using the MP4 or MOV file container. It's imperfect due to the fact that it might not be as compatible as regular MP4 because, according to some people that have used it, fragmented MP4 is not the same as a regular one. Though, don't take my word for it, I have never used this file format before. You may use this if your system is prone to crashing and prefer to contain it in MP4 rather than MKV for probably more compatibility with video editing software or video playback. Hybrid MP4 is the solution that OBS put in place for the exact imperfection though. It records the fragmented MP4 but finalizes the file into a regular MP4. So it's more of a technique because it combines the recording of fragmented MP4 and the finalization of regular MP4. Hybrid MP4 is currently the closest MP4 might be getting to emulating how MKV behaves in OBS. But since the format is still in beta, I cannot exactly recommend it confidently. Use it sparingly if you feel lucky though. So, to sum it all up, MP4 and MOV wins in compatibility, supported by all, like Premiere Pro. MKV wins in reliability, editing supported only by DaVinci Resolve though. Fragmented MP4 and MOV doesn't have the compatibility of a regular MP4 or MOV, but are more reliable than the regular ones. Hybrid MP4, last on the list, comes close to emulating MKV by combining fragmented MP4 and regular MP4, resulting to a high reliability and high compatibility. But that beta tag does come with a risk, so keep that in mind. Pick whichever format depending on your situation and or workstation. I would personally recommend the MKV file format as there are workarounds that can basically convert the MKV file format into a MP4 file format, which isn't that difficult. I'll probably touch upon that topic later at section 3 or something. Moving on to video encoders. Video encoders have a little more nuance to them as some are standard, some are more efficient, and some are newer and more efficient but demanding to process. Whatever H.264, HEVC, and AV1 mean, I will explain them later after talking about our hardware and software video encoder options because it's essential to know what does the work behind these. Like, it's essential to know what the engine of the machine is before we actually delve into the machine. You get it? So, first off, what is an encoder? Or rather, what is a video encoder? It is the hardware or software that does all the recording work. Without it, it wouldn't even be possible to do all of the work that we're doing right here, right now. There are plenty of video encoder options in OBS. Software encoding, Quicksync or QSV, AMD HW or AMF, and finally, Nvidia's NVENC. They all vary in their implementation, but they all serve the same purpose. Let's look at them one by one. Starting off with the software encoders. X264, AOM-AV1, and SVT-AV1 are all software encoder options in OBS. These encoders run on the CPU rather than the video card. It's slow and will tear your performance apart like doomsday, but arguably will have the best quality. If you have a good CPU, like a mid-range or one of the best of its generation, then you can use this video encoding option confidently. Up next is Quicksync or QSV. If you have an Intel GPU or iGPU, you will most likely see an option of Quicksync H.264 or Quicksync HEVC. These are Intel's hardware encoding options for those that use their GPUs or iGPUs. If you have an Intel hardware encoder, then you'd best choose Quicksync H.264 because that is their expertise. If you do have an Intel video card or GPU, then you can actually take advantage of their HEVC encoding, or better yet, the options not showing here, AV1. The ARC cards of Intel supports AV1 and are great with it. If you have the Intel option, play with these codecs to see what suits you, because I myself don't have an Intel GPU. But I do have an Intel iGPU, which is what I'm using right now. After that is NVENC. If you have an Nvidia GPU, then you're gonna have access to their dedicated hardware encoder built into their GPUs for video encoding and decoding. If you don't know whether if your card does or does not support NVENC, then you may see for yourself here in this list. Anyways, moving on. NVENC is good. It got pretty good over the years, basically the jack of all trades, master of none status, because they can encode in H.264, HEVC, and the new AV1 codec. Their H.264 is good enough, their HEVC is great, and their AV1 is available. What's great about NVENC is that it's powerful. You can really play with it because it is a dedicated hardware within the video card. It will have minimum impact on your gaming performance and will give you good recordings, is what I'm getting at. NVENC is the best choice for most, if not all, recording scenarios due to its versatility. The fact that you can choose any codec and play around with it gives you a lot of control on what you want to record or stream. So, if you have an Nvidia GPU, then this is the way to go. Finally, we have AMD's AMF or hardware. But I disappointingly have no experience with AMD, either with their CPUs or their hardware video cards. But I do assume that they function similarly to NVENC and QSV, so you can basically just use the same logic that I use for those two and apply it here as well. That will be all for this section. Sorry if it was a bit disappointing. With all that said, I hope that explains what encoders are and our options here in OBS. In summary, software encoders use your CPU and are slow in processing recordings, while hardware encoders, such as Quicksync, AMF, and NVENC, use the hardware built into them, making them very fast. But what do they process exactly? What kind of recording work do they do? That's what's coming up next, which are the codecs themselves. Now then, starting off like we did in video encoders, first off, what is a codec? Remember how the encoder does all the recording work? Well, this is basically the type of recording work that they are doing. These are similar types of work with different complexity and different results based on their bitrate. It's the basic gist of it, but if you're curious, you can take a look at this informative article defining codecs. In any cases, here are the codec options we currently have in OBS. So, let's start with the codec you'd most likely be using, which is the most common codec of all, H.264. H.264, also known as AVC, or Advanced Video Coding, is one of the older codecs that came up around 2 decades ago. Since its launch, it has become the most common codec all around the world. Your PC supports it, your phone supports it, hell, even your refrigerator probably supports it too. Everything damn near supports it because of how long it's been with us. That makes it the best codec for compatibility, meaning you can record and edit using it no problem. Because of how long it's been with us, people have found the time to properly implement it in their hardware encoders. It isn't particularly demanding to process nowadays, meaning even an iGPU, Intel's or maybe even AMD's iGPU, can encode using this codec in 1080-60 FPS at its slowest encoding preset. It generates decent video quality even at low bitrate because of its compression efficiency. So, you can rest assured that this codec will be the best all-rounder for recording and or streaming as well as video editing. It's just the most common and you'd best use this if you want any sort of compatibility. Up next is the upgrade of H.264, which is H.265. H.265 HEVC, or also known as High Efficiency Video Coding, was created a decade after H.264, making use of more advanced compression methods. It offers around a general 25 to 50% better data compression, meaning this codec can work with half the bitrate compared to H.264 and will deliver the same quality. That efficiency makes this codec great for reducing the file size of the videos and making more room for your storage space. The downside though? It will eat up twice of the processing power of your CPU or hardware encoder, making it difficult to use with weaker hardware. Most software editors support it now, so you can edit videos in this codec, but there are still some outliers or reports saying that it's not cooperating. So watch out for that since it varies. Overall, HEVC is a great choice for those that want to save space, but only if your hardware can handle it and if the streaming service supports it. Finally, AV1. AV1 or AO Media Video 1 is the new and hip rival of HEVC. It's basically just a better and newer version of HEVC, but not made by the same people who made HEVC. Better compression at even lower bitrates, so smaller file sizes, and slightly more processing demand because of it, so it really just follows the step of HEVC. If your GPU supports it, you can utilize this codec for even better recordings, and even better streaming quality on platforms that support it, which is still just YouTube and maybe some bits of Twitch. don't get your hopes up on editing video footage recorded with this codec, because from what I know, only DaVinci Resolve supports this codec yet again, with the majority being unable to work with it properly. That's about all of the common codecs we'll find in OBS. In summary, H.264 is the least demanding and best in compatibility. HEVC is twice slower to process, but great at efficiency, and AV1 is slightly better and slightly more demanding than HEVC. With that, we now know about the encoders and the codecs. Here's a chart to help you better navigate, or to sum it all up. But to explain further, AAC is Advanced Audio Coding. It's the successor of MP3, meaning much better and more efficient, and just as universal with its compatibility. It is recommended to use this audio codec for streaming, and if you're editing, because it is the codec that they are most compatible with. ALAC is Apple Lossless Audio Codec. It is close to AAC due to its container, but not quite, because it is designed to be lossless, which results to higher quality at larger file size. For some reason, DaVinci Resolve sometimes fails to identify the audio codec, making it incompatible for editing using that. FLAC is Free Lossless Audio Codec. People just refer to it as FLAC though. It is another lossless codec like ALAC, but actually came before it and is quite better and much preferred by many audio enthusiasts. This is because of its high quality at reasonable file sizes and the fact that it works well with most editing software that isn't Adobe Premiere Pro. You can use this confidently, much like AAC. Opus is something like a better version of AAC. It is much more efficient, YouTube uses it for most of their audio, and it's all at a smaller file size. The problem isn't the codec itself, but the editing software that can't recognize it, making editing with it not an option. PCM is pulse code modulation. The 16 to 32-bit thing I can only assume is how much quality you want, but even 16 is a little too much already. It is probably compatible with all editing software, seeing as this is the audio format that Windows use, and yet another lossless codec like FLAC and ALAC. In summary, AAC is the best to use for most if not all cases. If you want audio fidelity, then you may choose between the three lossless options, although with varying compatibility. PCM has the highest compatibility, FLAC is a close second, and ALAC is still pretty unknown to me. Opus is great if you don't plan on editing and just want a finalized video with a lower audio bitrate because of its efficiency. You might see that there are 6 boxes here that you can click. These settings are tied to your audio mixer. Number 1 is track 1, number 2 is track 2, and so on. You can configure what tracks should be heard or included in the final recorded file by checking the box. We'll get back to this once we take a look at the actual audio and audio mixer. So, moving on. The Rescale output both here and in streaming are isolated output resolutions if you want to have custom output resolutions for them. They will still take reference to the output scaled resolution, so make sure you set it properly. Take it like this. You can stream at 720p and record at 1080, and not affect the video settings output scaled resolution if you set their individual rescale output to be so. It's a neat way to handle streaming and recording at different resolutions, basically. Custom Muxer and automatic file splitting. I'm not familiar with custom Muxer, but I assume it's to customize how usually your X264 video encoder handles its recordings. It's best to keep it empty unless you know what you're doing. On the other hand, file splitting I also have not touched, but I imagine it's just to split the recordings you have after a dedicated time, either to be cautious of corruption, prevent storage space errors if the recording goes overboard, or however you want to use it. Use this if you wish to use MP4 or MOV file containers. These are settings connected to the video encoder of recording settings. These are the settings that will contribute to the overall quality of your video. You might notice that whenever we switch to a different video encoder, such as NVENC or QSV or X264, the encoder settings adjust itself to what can be configured for it. Don't be alarmed though, because you'll know these settings soon enough. To make things clear and to categorize them, we'll call the settings that are there most of the time as standard encoder settings. And the settings that are special to a single encoder, we'll call them special encoder settings. For now, let's cover the standard encoder settings. The encoder settings that I've classified as standard consists of rate control, bitrate, keyframe interval, preset, profile, and B-frames. These are the most common things you'll see when configuring a hardware encoder's video encoder in OBS Studio. Starting with rate control, we can't really call this a single setting because it is very much tied to the setting directly below it, the bitrates, which is why we'll talk about them under the single breath. To start off, rate control is the technique of controlling the bitrate of the video. Rate control, depending on the technique, will present you a different way for setting the bitrate, from constant bitrate, variable bitrate, constant quality, and more. With that said, let's start with the first most commonly used for streaming, which is constant bitrate. Before we can get into constant bitrate, you should know about bitrates. Bitrates are basically the amount of data in a single second of your video. I've told before that the higher the bitrate, the better the video, but the more space it'll take. Bitrates use a measurement of kilobits, not to be mistaken with kilobytes. It's a whole storage labeling thing, so if you're interested, you could check out videos related to it. The takeaway here is that they measure differently. 8 kilobits is equal to 1 kilobyte, and 8,000 kilobits equal to 1 megabyte. With that knowledge, let's finally look into our rate controls, starting with constant bitrate. In CBR, or constant bitrate, you can set your bitrate, which will be carried throughout the recording. Taking the discussion we had earlier about bitrates and kilobits, you can use this equation I made to measure just how big your recording could be if you use constant bitrate. Just remember that each audio source also has bitrates, so don't forget to add that in the equation. Most live streaming services use this, so take note of that if you plan on streaming. For recording, this rate control is useful for giving a defined quality output with no room for lowering or raising the bitrate. Word of advice, don't set it too high, set it just right for yourself. CQP, Constant Quantization Parameter, and or CRF, Constant Rate Factor. If you're using CQP and or CRF, the bitrate will be configured automatically based on whatever is happening on the screen. You may adjust the quality or bitrate of it by setting the integer amount, the setting that replaced the bitrate setting, which is directly below the rate control. A lower integer means the higher the quality, and bitrate. Higher is, you already know. A bit of a reverse, since usually higher numbers mean better results. But in this setting, a lower number means something like a lower tolerance. It is less likely to let a detail slide away. For example, here is a CQP of 20 and a CQP of 40. This is the rate control setting to use if you would rather the encoder be the one to set your bitrate instead of you. VBR or variable bitrate. This rate control option functions closely to CBR, but with a little more flexibility. First, you set your bitrate, which is the bitrate it will continuously record in for most of the time, and you set up a ceiling, which is the bitrate that it can spike into if the initial amount you set up wasn't enough to record the screen at a good quality. It feels like a mix of CBR and CQP, but instead of the encoder, you are the one in control of the continuous bitrate and the maximum bitrate. It's very useful if you want more control over your bitrate. This is the rate control that I would recommend most people if they really just want to control their storage and their quality. Exiting talking about rate control, we have keyframe intervals. Keyframes are a point in the video where a whole frame is sent instead of just the differences. It's a topic of efficiency that I am no expert in, but the gist of it is that if you input more keyframes, which are full frames instead of just references, then the video will look better. The recommended, or rather mandated amount for streaming is 2. Out of streaming though, you may confidently set it to 0, which is auto, letting the encoder set however many it wants for itself. Presets are basically configurations on how to process the video and audio. You will see different iterations on how each video encoders present their presets. Software, NVENC, Quicksync, and AMD all use different ways to label their preset, or target usage, or CPU usage, but they all indicate which is the slowest and which is the fastest. The slower the preset is, the better the video will be, and the smaller the file size, but the more difficult it is to process. The faster the preset, on the other hand, the video will feel more like a rushed project by the encoder, as in, not the best, but is going to be somewhat presentable. To know which is the best preset for you and your encoder, you have to conduct tests, because we don't all have the same hardware, and thus we cannot use these uniform settings. If the preset is too much, OBS will tell you in the form of encoder overload. The encoder overloading will result to the video becoming less of a video and more like a laggy PowerPoint presentation. My advice for you is to find a preset that you are comfortable with and one that your encoder can handle. My personal settings will be shown at section 3, so you may skip there if you're curious, but we most likely will not have the same settings. I can only give you recommendations based on your settings for later on. Profiles are tools that basically ask what features you want your encoder to use. High, using the best and latest, baseline being the most compatible, and main, using the best of both worlds in features and compatibility. These profiles are for H.264 though. HEVC and AV1 use main and main 10, which are basically the same as H.264's anyways. High is usually the best choice since it has the best compression efficiency, though older devices may not support it. Main is the balance between high and baseline, so just take it as the standard. Baseline is the older one that prioritizes compatibility. It apparently doesn't have B-frames to make the video look better at lower bitrate. You can confidently use high or main since most people probably have the hardware to decode videos encoded in these profiles. So yeah, just don't worry and pick the high or the better one. Bidirectional frames, or B-frames for short, are frames that work on compressing the video. They look at the frame that came before and look at the frames that will come after to be able to compress where it is necessary. As you can tell, they work to make the overall file size to be smaller, which is great, but the more B-frames you have, the higher processing demand as it takes a bit of smarts to look at the frames before and afterwards to determine what has changed and be able to compress it. Though it's not as much of a problem for hardware encoders, so use them as you see fit. That's pretty much all for the standard encoder settings. Moving on to special encoder settings, which are settings unique to an encoder. This is a section for the things unique to a hardware encoder or even a software encoder. The differences or addition is often minor, but it exists, so we must differentiate them from the standard. Quicksync or QSV has a unique rate control that is its own and not found in the rest, which is ICQ or Intel Constant Quality. It is Intel's implementation of CQ or Constant Quality. Since it is their own, they optimize the rate control for Intel hardware encoders, making it the preferable rate control for Intel hardware encoding. In addition to the rate control settings, it replaces the preset with target usage, TU7 being the fastest and TU1 being the slowest, and also the bitrate with ICQ quality, higher numbers being lower quality and lower numbers with better quality, much like CQP. If you have an Intel hardware encoder, then I suggest you use this option as it is hardware optimized. NVENC being the most developed of the bunch naturally has quite a bit of special settings. NVENC users will have extra checkbox options, tuning, 2 additional rate controls, and a multi-pass mode option. Starting with the 2 new extra rate controls, these are VBR with target quality and lossless. Variable bitrate with target quality is basically CQP with the limit set by variable bitrate. It chooses the bitrate it wants, and you set the bitrate where it stops. It has more edge than normal VBR, but could also reach the maximum set bitrate more depending on the CQP setting. The lossless rate control means no detail will be lost, making massive file sizes, but also indistinguishable footage quality from the source. Usually you'd only use this if you really want to pursue quality over practicality. Tuning is a bit unfamiliar for me, but in general, if you want to prioritize the quality of the recording, use high quality tuning. If you want to prioritize your gameplay over the recording, then you may use low latency tuning. The lower your tuning mode, the lower the quality, but the better your latency will be during gameplay. You'd really only want this option to be higher if you don't mind the latency, and lower if you're playing latency crucial FPS games, like Counter-Strike or something. Multi-pass mode is for a nicer picture at a lower bitrate by looking at the data of a frame and then doing data calculation stuff to make it look as nice but with smaller file size. The 2 passes quarter resolution analyzes 1/4 of the frame, and full resolution does the whole frame. It's another setting that optimizes compression in a situation where bitrate is limited, like in CBR and VBR settings. So, if you're using CQP, you can probably ignore the setting, as it also does cost a bit of performance depending on your video card. Now, onto the 2 new extra checkboxes, look ahead and adaptive quantization, formerly known as psycho-visual tuning. Look ahead looks at the future frames to better distribute the bitrate around, resulting to a better looking video. Adaptive quantization looks at the current frames to better distribute bitrate, resulting to a better video. Both have the cost of GPU utilization and some adding latency, but if you want better bitrate usage, then these two are your options. If they're consuming too much of your GPU, then turning them off should not negatively impact your content too much. Due to the fact that I don't support any AMD hardware, I unfortunately can't give an AMD version or even know if they did something different. So, you're on your own in that regard. As you can see, each hardware also employ their own techniques for encoding your recordings. I recommend checking out what they offer on your own to have a better grasp with them. With recording settings and encoder settings done, let's move on to the audio tab. Let's have a little detour before moving to Advanced Mode's Audio tab. Streaming. I said before that many of the settings that apply to recording may also apply to streaming. That isn't entirely true. The only rate control you should use while streaming is CBR. The keyframe interval should be set to 2, and H.264 may be the only codec live streaming sites offer you. As you can see, the weak link isn't the hardware or software you have, but the service you'll be using, such as Twitch or YouTube or Facebook Live. Since our only actual option is CBR, the bitrate we'll put in the settings will be the ones that the streaming service allows. Here's a review of the chart for their bitrate recommendations. For Twitch, you can also check here. And for YouTube, you can also refer to the site. But there's another setting in play here, which is our internet upload speed. You'll need at least a 20 megabits upload speed for a smooth experience. So, check your internet upload speed to see if you pass the minimum. Your internet upload speed and your bitrate use the same data of measurement, meaning if you have 20 megabits upload speed, then you can also stream at that number. It's just that it isn't recommended due to the limitations. But that's the relation and similarity of your internet upload speed and your streaming bitrate. Keyframe intervals. Most streaming platforms demand a specific amount of 2, so we'll just abide by that. That's about all the streaming specific settings they demand, so let's move on to audio. Moving on to audio. You remember seeing those audio tracks, right? Well, those are going to be the audio that will be in the video. Clicking on a track adds more options when you're choosing which audio to listen to once it's a video. It's useful if you want to combine 2 different audio sources into one track, or isolate an audio source to one track. Talking about tracks and all makes you wonder where your audio actually is. Well, it's here, in the audio mixer. These are our current and default sources. We can add more source, or subtract or mute ones, but that's for later. For now, let's see how we can assign them to an audio track. Click on Advanced Properties, and there you have it, the control to be able to assign an audio source to an audio track. The checkboxes further right are the boxes we should pay attention to when we want to assign an audio source to a track. You can uncheck a box and it won't be heard on that track, and vice versa. OBS is limited to having 6 tracks, so you have to make the most of it. Following me back to the settings, we come upon the audio tab in our output settings. This audio tab determines the quality of our audio. As you can imagine, a higher number in the audio bitrate means a higher quality for the audio in that track. Set it as high as you wish for your recordings. For streaming, I believe that is something they'll inform you about again. Aside from audio bitrate, you also have the ability to name a track. This is useful so that you don't get lost when switching to an audio track in a video. That's about all the things you'll need to know to start configuring the audio. As a final note, you can have multiple audio tracks in an MP4 or MKB format video. So, add as many as you'd like, or rather, just add 6, and be wise with that 6. Replay buffer. I have never used this option, but I imagine it has more to do with the hotkeys and some connections to the recording, where you can press a hotkey and it'll save the last 20 seconds or whatever the replay time is set of recording. But really, I have no experience with this, so it's better if you just check other sources for this one. That covers basically all the advanced settings that most people will probably check when they're looking into OBS's settings. I covered it with only what I know, so if you want to know more about it, you could check some of the articles I've linked in the description, or you could check other people covering OBS as well, because there's plenty of tutorial videos out there that isn't just mine. If you have any questions, make sure to comment them, and I'll try to answer when I can. With that said, let's proceed to section 2.5, a showcase for settings. So, my recommended settings for someone with a high-end gear is anything. They can set any of the hardware encoders that they like. For me, I can only have these ones. They could even probably use X264 and run it at somewhere like slow. And yeah, they can just set the preset to the slowest, full multipass mode to full resolution, profile to high, tuning to high, enable these two options, and go wild, because that's really pretty much the price you paid for. So, this is my recommended settings for people with the mid-range system. I actually also have a mid-range system, so I'm kind of just showing off my own system. I recommend, well, H.264 video encoder and codec, Nvidia NVENC, audio encoder to be AAC for, well, these two are just maximum compatibility, MKV so that you're, well, error proof and stuff. For the preset, since it's H.264, we can set it to the slowest. And multipass mode quarter resolution, I never really actually saw much differences even if I went full or quarter. And you can turn on adaptive quantization. At least that's my recommended settings for H.264. If we move on to HEVC, we need to be a little bit more, well, mindful. We can't really set it to the slowest now. I think slow is really good too. I don't see any differences between slow and slower. I do notice that it struggles a little bit more around here. So yeah, slow is good, tuning is high. Don't ever touch this one. Multi-pass mode for quarter resolution. Profile at main 10. Turn these two off. B-frames as each. Like before, these three are on you. But there's one more thing that we have to be mindful about. For H.264, we can basically just go wild with the resolution. But for HEVC, I don't think we can go as wild. My maximum recommended resolution if you're recording an HEVC footage is 2K. This isn't 2K, but yeah, QHD. And if we move on to AV1, well, you can apply the same logic there. Quarter resolution, main 10, turn these two off, B-frames as each, and yeah, this looks good. Just be mindful of the resolution, because that's the one that really will cripple you if you set it too high. Because I don't think mid-range systems can handle 4K. The most that they can handle is 2K, or well, this is 2.5K. Be mindful of the resolution. Now, for people with lower end systems, such as people with a pretty dated CPU, or just, well, the newer, pretty weak ones, maybe an i3, a Ryzen 3, those are pretty good in their own way, but not for live encoding. Any cases, if you have an older Nvidia GPU, you probably still have the option to dabble in Nvidia NVENC H.264. Or actually, if you have a 50 series, no, not 50 series, somewhere around their low-end budget GPUs, like a 3050, 4050, 5050, that's a new one. Yep. But something around along those lines, a 2050, a 1050, you can still probably play with the Nvidia NVENC H.264. But I will say HEVC and AV1's pretty, well, no longer at the table. You can still play with it. You can still set it to the slowest, so rather, set it to slow, tuning to high, quarter past 2, and these two you can still just turn them off. Or you can even turn one on. Because, as I've said before, H.264 isn't particularly difficult to encode. That also applies for Quicksync's H.264, which is currently running on my iGPU, an Intel iGPU. Their iGPU is actually pretty powerful, at least for mine, which is a UHD 770. So, if you have an Intel iGPU, I recommend you set it to something like medium. And yeah, that's basically it. Just medium or slow. I think these two are just the best spots. Medium much more. And yeah, this is for an iGPU if you sport one. But if you don't have or rather, if you don't want to utilize the iGPU or the GPU for video encoding, you have the X264 option. Now, mid-range systems and high-end systems can kinda toy with this, but it will still cripple them. For low-end systems though, I think the only option you have is the very fast option. Very fast at main, or high if you're feeling lucky. That's basically it. These ones are still for you. You're gonna have to be the one that sets these ones. Although, since you have a lower end system, I recommend you take your eyes off of the video encoder, since H.264 will basically render nicely with either a dated or a low-end 2050 RTX GPU from Nvidia, or even an Intel iGPU, sorry. What you want to put your attention to, again, is the resolution. Since you're running off of a CPU and iGPU or a low-end dedicated graphics card, I recommend you set your eyes on the output scaled resolution. You cannot set it to any higher than 1080p. This is going to be the only resolution that you can encode in, or at least I recommend you encode in, because anything else higher and it's going to cripple you, just like the others before. 2K is basically for the mid-range and the high-end systems, while 1080p is for everyone. So yeah, keep an eye for the scaled resolution. That's about my recommended settings for OBS. I hope you were able to follow through, and I hope you create your own settings and not take reference from me, because this video isn't actually me telling you what to pick, it's me telling you how you can pick it yourself and all that stuff. Section 3 is not going to be a part of this video, it's going to be in the much later updated video, which is basically still just this video, but updated. So yeah, I'll be sending that video much later after I've actually done the fine-tuning. In any cases, thank you for watching, and as always, see you later.